Margaret always woke up at 6 a.m. After years of habit, her eyes would naturally open before the alarm clock rang. Slipping out of bed, she quietly made her way downstairs so as not to wake her husband Henry, who was still sleeping beside her. Standing in the kitchen, she set up the coffee filter in the coffee maker while gazing out the window. It was a peaceful autumn morning, and the maple tree in the yard was turning red. "Another beautiful day," she murmured softly to herself, enjoying the aroma of coffee spreading throughout the house. This quiet morning time was the most precious part of Margaret's day. A time when no one would disturb her, when she could organize her thoughts and consider what the day ahead would bring. She picked up her coffee cup and took the first sip. The rich, full-bodied flavor completely chased away her sleepiness. She heard light footsteps racing down the stairs. Margaret's face naturally softened. "Good morning, Grandma," came an energetic voice, and her 7-year-old grandson Nathan appeared in the kitchen. His hair was sticking up adorably from bed head. "Good morning, Nathan. Did you sleep well?" Margaret asked, gently stroking her grandson's head. "Aha! I had the weirdest dream. I dreamed I went to school with dinosaurs," Nathan said, his eyes sparkling as he spoke. "My, that sounds like fun. What would you like to eat today?" "Pancakes," he answered immediately, and seeing her grandson's response, Margaret felt her heart warm. When she saw this child smile, all her fatigue just melted away. Before long, her daughter Rebecca came downstairs too. She had been living at home with her son Nathan since her divorce 3 years ago. "Mom, thank you for everything," her daughter said gratefully, and Margaret smiled in response. "What are you talking about? We're family. Having you both here with us is our greatest happiness." Rebecca's eyes moistened slightly. During the divorce, she had been disappointed with her life, but now she had regained her brightness. It was probably because she had such a wonderful son in Nathan. Henry came downstairs with his newspaper in hand. He sat at the breakfast table, spread out the paper, and said, "There's been a lot of disturbing incidents lately. Apparently there was a robbery in the neighboring state yesterday. Yes, we need to be careful. But this area is still safe," Margaret replied while making Nathan's pancakes. As Nathan got ready for school, he spoke excitedly, "Today we have art class. The teacher is going to teach us a new craft project." "What are you going to make?" Margaret asked, and Nathan put his finger to his lips and answered, "It's a secret. I'll show you when it's finished." These innocent exchanges were Margaret's greatest treasure. After breakfast, Rebecca left for school, Henry went to volunteer at the local library, and Nathan cheerfully boarded the school bus. After seeing everyone off, Margaret began tending to the garden. The roses were blooming beautifully. As she carefully watered them, she thought to herself, "Peace is truly wonderful." In the afternoon, she decided to bake Rebecca's favorite apple pie. Imagining the dinner time they would all spend together as a family, Margaret felt filled with happiness. As Margaret was kneading the pie dough in the kitchen, the phone rang. She wiped her hands and picked up the receiver to hear the cheerful voice of her longtime friend Linda. "Margaret, how are you? Will you participate in this Saturday's charity bazaar?" "Of course, Linda. I look forward to it every year." "I'll bring something handmade this year," Margaret answered, already having an idea in mind. "A hand-knitted scarf would be perfect for the season." "That would be wonderful. Your handmade items are always so popular. By the way, how are Rebecca and little Nathan?" "They're doing well, thank you. Nathan is enjoying school life, and Rebecca seems to find meaning in her work. Having more time to spend together as a family is my greatest joy." After hanging up, Margaret returned to making the pie. As she carefully peeled the apples, she reflected on the importance of connections with friends. Henry, too, had been making new friends through community volunteer work since his retirement. It was wonderful that even in the later part of life, there could still be new encounters. At 3:30 p.m., Rebecca came home earlier than expected. The meeting was cancelled today, so I could come home early, Rebecca explained as she took off her shoes at the entrance. That's nice. Let's have some coffee and relax a bit, Margaret said, noticing the tired expression on her daughter's face. The two sat in the living room, relaxing with warm coffee. The autumn afternoon sunlight streamed through the window, warmly illuminating the entire room. This kind of mother-daughter time alone was very precious. How has Nathan been lately? How are things at school? Margaret asked. He's doing very well. It seems he's made several new friends. He told me he's become particularly close with a classmate named Jamie. Rebecca's face brightened. That's wonderful. Having friends makes school life much more enjoyable. Rebecca's expression clouded slightly as she continued, but sometimes he talks about Charles. He asks, when is Daddy coming home? Charles. Hearing the name of Rebecca's ex-husband made Margaret's heart feel complicated too. He was a 38-year-old real estate agent who had started neglecting his family, using work as an excuse, and eventually the divorce came about when his relationship with another woman was discovered. He was Nathan's biological father, but he often failed to keep his promises about visits, frequently hurting the child. That's a difficult issue. But I think it's important to keep telling Nathan that he has us. Margaret squeezed her daughter's hand. You're right, Mom. If we give him enough love, I'm sure he'll be fine. As the mother and daughter continued their conversation, they heard the front door open. Henry was home. I'm back, her husband's voice echoed. It sounded a bit more tired than usual. Welcome home. How was today? Did you enjoy volunteering at the library? Margaret went to greet him. Well, same as always. I did story time for the children, but kids these days have such short attention spans, it's troublesome, Henry answered with a wry smile. About 30 minutes later, Nathan came home from school. I'm home, his energetic voice rang throughout the house. Welcome back, Nathan. How was today? Margaret asked, and Nathan answered with sparkling eyes. It was so much fun. In art class, we made animals out of clay. I made an elephant. An elephant sounds difficult. Can I see it? Yes. I'll bring it home tomorrow, and I'll definitely show you. While preparing dinner, Margaret listened to her family's conversations. In the living room, Henry was helping Nathan with his homework. Rebecca was preparing for the next day's classes while occasionally joining in their conversation. These casual daily scenes were Margaret's greatest happiness. What should we do this weekend? Henry asked Nathan. I want to go to the zoo. I saw on TV that a baby elephant was born, Nathan suggested excitedly. That's a good idea. If the weather is nice, let's all go together, Rebecca agreed. Dinner was Margaret's special pot roast and apple pie. The family of 4 gathered around the table, discussing the day's events. Nathan talked about his friends at school, Rebecca about the growth of the children in her classes, and Henry about the people he met at the library. While each had their own world, this time spent together as a family around one table was irreplaceable. After dinner, they all relaxed in the living room watching TV. Nathan naturally sat on Henry's lap, watching his favorite cartoon show. He gradually became sleepy and eventually fell asleep in Henry's arms. This child is really adorable, Margaret murmured with a smile. Rebecca said with gratitude, Mom, Dad, thank you so much. When I got divorced, I wondered what would happen, but being able to live together as a family like this makes both Nathan and me happy. Of course. We're family, so you can stay here as long as you want, Margaret put her arm around her daughter's shoulders. Henry nodded and said, That's right. As long as this house is a place where you feel secure, you're always welcome. Besides, having this child around makes the house brighter. Looking at the sleeping Nathan, the three adults smiled quietly at each other. Having overcome the painful experience of divorce, they had now built new bonds as a family. They all realized that true family is created not just by blood ties, but by hearts that care for one another. Before bed, Margaret wrote in her diary, a habit she maintained. Under the small lamp on her bedside table, she moved her pen across the page, reflecting on the day's events. Today was another peaceful day. Linda's invitation to the charity bazaar, the afternoon time with Rebecca, Nathan's energetic return home, and dinner with the whole family. It's just an ordinary day, but I think this is what true happiness is. Having the whole family healthy and spending time together with smiles is what matters most. She closed her diary and looked out the window to see the full moon shining in the night sky. The quiet residential neighborhood illuminated by streetlights brought her peace. May tomorrow be another good day, she prayed in her heart as Margaret fell into deep sleep. At 8 a.m. on Saturday morning, Margaret was preparing breakfast in the kitchen. Today the whole family was planning to go to the zoo, and her heart felt light. She was excited about seeing the baby elephant that Nathan had been looking forward to, and she was enthusiastically making special sandwiches. The doorbell rang. Who could it be so early in the morning? Margaret wiped her hands and headed to the front door. Yes, who is it? She called out as she opened the door, only to be met with an unbelievable sight. It was Nathan. But it wasn't her usual energetic grandson. His school uniform was stained bright red with blood, and his face was deathly pale. Blood was dripping from his forehead, and his body was covered with scrapes and bruises. His right arm was bent at an unnatural angle, clearly injured. Nathan! Margaret's scream broke the morning silence. It was loud enough for the neighbors to hear, but she didn't care about that. Nathan was staggering toward Margaret. His steps were unsteady, and he looked like he might collapse at any moment. She could see his small body trembling. "Grandma, please, help me." His voice was hoarse and barely audible. It was like the voice of someone who had been screaming for a long time. Margaret embraced her grandson with trembling hands. At that moment, she felt how cold Nathan's body was. It was as cold as ice, with no sense of life. It's okay, Grandma is here." However, Nathan was trying to take something out of his pocket with shaking hands. It was a small smartphone. The screen was cracked but still seemed usable. It was too new a model for a child to have, and Margaret momentarily wondered whose it was. "Look at this, please." Nathan's hand grabbed Margaret's hand. That hand was ice cold and shaking violently. Seeing the blood on his small fingers made Margaret's heart pound. "Nathan, let's treat your injuries first." "You're badly hurt," Margaret tried desperately to stay calm. "No. Look at this first." Nathan's eyes held a serious light she had never seen before. They weren't the eyes of a 7-year-old child. They were the eyes of someone who had seen something terrible. Margaret reluctantly took the trembling smartphone. The screen showed a single video file. "Watch this, you'll understand everything." Nathan's consciousness seemed to be becoming hazy. It looked painful for him to keep his eyes open. Margaret's fingers were shaking, making it difficult to operate properly. No matter how many times she tapped, there was no response. When the video finally began to play, she heard Henry's voice behind her. "Margaret, who's here?" She could hear footsteps coming down the stairs. "Henry, call an ambulance. Nathan is injured," Margaret shouted. However, as the smartphone screen lit up and the video began to play, Margaret gasped. What was shown there were the events of last night. The location was inside a warehouse-like building in the city. Under dim lighting, two men were talking. One was Rebecca's ex-husband, Charles. The other. Margaret's heart nearly stopped. It was Henry. Her own husband was having a secret meeting with Charles. This can't be true, Margaret murmured. But the video continued. The audio was audible too. Charles's voice could be heard. Everything is going according to plan. We'll make the final transfer next Tuesday. That will move all $5 million to the overseas account. Henry's voice continued. The company audit is next month, so we need to process everything by then. The falsification of the books is perfect. Margaret's mind went blank. What was this about? $5 million. Overseas accounts. Falsifying books. The video continued further. Charles said, "Make sure Rebecca never finds out. That woman has sharp instincts. Don't worry. My wife and daughter haven't noticed anything at all. They all think I'm a good husband and father." Henry was laughing. It was a cold laugh. Margaret began shaking all over. Was this Henry's true nature? A side of her husband of 40 years that she had never known. In the video, there was suddenly a noise. Someone seemed to have entered the warehouse. The camera shook, and it was clear the person filming was trying to hide. Charles's voice became tense. Someone's there. I'll go check, Henry's voice. Then the screen began shaking violently. The person filming was running away. Angry shouting could be heard from behind. Wait. Who's there? The camera fell to the ground. The video became choppy. A child's crying could be heard. It was Nathan's voice. Stop. I didn't hear anything. An adult man's voice. This kid heard everything. What do we do? Another man's voice. Charles, we need to silence him. After that, the screen went dark. The video ended. Margaret stood there stunned. The smartphone in her hand didn't seem real. Was this a nightmare? Nathan said in a weak voice, Grandma. I'm sorry, but I wanted you to know that Daddy and Grandpa were doing bad things. Don't apologize. Margaret's voice was also shaking. You didn't do anything wrong. Behind her, Henry's voice came, Margaret, I called the ambulance. What happened to Nathan? Margaret turned around. There was her husband with his usual worried expression. But she could no longer believe that expression. Who was this person? Who had she been living with for 40 years? Henry. Margaret called her husband's name. That voice was no longer a wife's voice. Rebecca also came running down the stairs. Nathan. What happened? Her daughter embraced her son. Mommy. Nathan showed a relieved expression in his mother's arms. The ambulance siren could be heard in the distance. Margaret trembled as she held Nathan tightly. It's okay, I'll protect you. I'll definitely protect you. But in her heart, intense confusion continued. In the ambulance, Nathan began speaking in fragments. While the medical staff treated his injuries and gently said, You don't have to force yourself to talk, Nathan continued in a shaking voice. Last night. I saw it. His small voice echoed in the ambulance. Margaret held her grandson's hand and listened carefully. Mommy was working late, so Grandpa said he'd come pick me up, but he took me to a different place. Margaret's heart pounded violently. Henry went to pick up Nathan. She hadn't heard anything about that. Daddy was there, with Grandpa, talking about bad things. Tears welled up in Nathan's eyes. When they arrived at the hospital, the doctor's examination began immediately. A broken right arm, multiple bruises, mild concussion. Fortunately, his life wasn't in danger, but it was clear he had been severely assaulted. Soon after, 2 police officers arrived. An older detective spoke to Margaret in a gentle tone. Mrs. Morrison, right? We'd like to examine the video on the smartphone we confiscated from your grandson. Margaret handed over the smartphone with trembling hands. Please, reveal the truth. While the police officer was checking the video, Rebecca and Henry rushed to the hospital. Rebecca tearfully embraced her son, and Henry worriedly asked about the situation. However, Margaret could now see through that act. Nathan. Are you okay? What happened? Rebecca's love as a mother was genuine. The police officer approached Henry. You're Henry Morrison. Yes, what is it? Tension appeared on Henry's face. We found significant evidence concerning you. Could you accompany us to the station? At that moment, Henry's face went pale. It wasn't the expression of the husband she had known for 40 years. It was like a mask had fallen off, revealing a cold, calculating expression. There must be some mistake. I haven't done anything. We'd like to ask you about your relationship with Charles Benson. Rebecca turned around in surprise. Charles. My ex-husband. Dad, what relationship do you have with Charles? At the police station, the full extent of the video was revealed. Margaret and Rebecca waited in a separate room, but the content explained by the police officer was beyond imagination. Henry had been embezzling funds from client companies at the accounting firm where he had worked for many years. His method was sophisticated. He would extract small amounts from multiple companies and falsify the books to prevent detection. However, this wasn't a solo crime. Charles was his accomplice. Working as a real estate agent, he created fictitious real estate transactions and made the embezzled funds appear as legitimate transactions while transferring them to overseas accounts. Their criminal activity had begun 3 years ago, and the total amount exceeded $5 million. I can't believe it. Rebecca murmured. Dad, and Charles. Even more shocking facts were revealed. Nathan's injuries weren't from an accidental mishap. Last night, while Henry was going to pick up Nathan, he stopped at the warehouse for a final meeting with Charles. Nathan was supposed to wait in the car, but out of curiosity, he entered the building and overheard their conversation. Making a quick decision, he started recording with the smartphone he had. Even as a child, he must have sensed that something bad was happening, the police officer explained. However, they discovered him. Charles tried to take the smartphone from Nathan to destroy the evidence, but Nathan cleverly hid the recorded file elsewhere and left a dummy file on the smartphone. Charles Benson was primarily responsible for the assault to silence him. Henry claims he tried to stop him, but why did Nathan come to our house? Where is Charles now? Margaret asked. Charles is currently on the run. Nathan must have desperately escaped and came to you, the people he trusted most. He apparently walked nearly 5 kilometers in the middle of the night and hid until morning. Margaret couldn't stop crying. With that small body, he had fought fear all night and came to them. In the interrogation room, Henry was confessing everything. At first it was small amounts. I was anxious about life after retirement. When I consulted Charles, he said, there's a way no one will find out. Didn't you think about your family? The detective pressed. Family. Henry gave a bitter smile. My wife thought I was a good husband. My daughter believed I was an upstanding father. But the real me isn't that kind of person. Money was more important. Hearing those words, Margaret realized that their 40-year marriage had been an illusion. She had loved an ideal husband who didn't exist. A few days later, Charles was arrested in the neighboring state. He had attempted a bank robbery to obtain escape funds and was caught in the act. He would be prosecuted for assault against Nathan and as an accomplice in the embezzlement. The facts revealed in court further devastated the family. Of the embezzled $5 million, $3 million had already been spent on their personal indulgences. Henry had purchased luxury cars and golf club memberships, while Charles had spent money on trips with his mistress and luxury goods. Dad's new golf clubs and the car he recently bought, it was all stolen money, Rebecca said in a trembling voice. Margaret was also remembering. Henry had recently often said his investments were successful and given her expensive presents. All of that had been stolen money too. On the day of sentencing, Henry was given 15 years in prison. Charles, with the additional assault charges, received a 20-year sentence. As they left the courtroom, Henry looked at Margaret. His eyes no longer held their former warmth. "Margaret. I'm sorry." However, Margaret didn't respond. No matter what he said now, it wouldn't touch her heart. The love and trust of 40 years had been completely reduced to ashes. Part of the embezzled funds was recovered, but most had already been lost. Margaret and her family had to sell their house and move to a small apartment. "I'm sorry, Mom. Because of Dad." Rebecca apologized. "Don't apologize. We're family. Real family is connected by bonds of the heart, not money." 6 months had passed, but their new life in the small 2-bedroom apartment was certainly not easy. However, Margaret strangely noticed that her heart felt lighter than before. "Grandma, welcome home," Nathan greeted her with a bright voice when he came home from school. The scars on his arm were still visible, but children's resilience is wonderful, and now he was running around energetically. Margaret had started working part-time at a neighborhood supermarket. Living on her pension alone was difficult for the three of them, so she needed to work. However, conversations with customers and interactions with colleagues were adding color to her new life. "How was today?" Rebecca asked while preparing dinner. Her daughter had also increased her after-school tutoring work to help support the household. "It was a very good day. A new customer asked me to teach her my homemade cookie recipe," Margaret smiled. Gathered around the small dining table, the three ate dinner together. Compared to meals in their previous large house, it was incomparably modest, but the conversation was lively. The time spent talking about each other's daily events and laughing together was an irreplaceable treasure. "Grandma," Nathan said with a serious expression, "when I grow up, I want to be a police officer." "Why?" Margaret asked gently. "Because I want to protect important people from bad people. I want to protect truly kind people like Grandma and Mommy." Tears welled up in Margaret's eyes. From that terrible experience, this child had learned something so wonderful. "That's a wonderful dream, Nathan. Grandma will support you whatever path you choose." Rebecca also looked at her son with pride. "Mommy feels the same way. Because of your courage, we were able to learn the truth. You're our hero." After dinner, the three relaxed on the living room couch watching TV. Sitting close together on the small sofa was warmer than any luxurious mansion life. Before bed, Margaret opened her diary for the first time in a while. "Today marks 6 months since our new life began. What we lost was certainly significant. The 40-year marriage I had believed in, stable economic circumstances, and above all, trust in people. However, we also gained something. We were able to understand the true meaning of family. It's not blood ties, money, or a big house that makes a family. It's hearts that care for each other, support each other in times of trouble, and share the truth. Only now, at this age, do I truly understand that this is what real family is." Looking out the window, she could see the quiet residential neighborhood illuminated by streetlights. It was different from the upscale neighborhood they used to live in, but warm people lived here too. When the neighbors learned of Margaret's situation, they quietly extended helping hands. Nathan's courage taught us what's truly important. The most valuable things in life aren't money or status. It's having family who love and trust each other. Margaret closed her diary and placed it on the bedside table. From the next room, she could hear the peaceful breathing of Rebecca and Nathan as they slept. "Tomorrow I can start a new day with these children again. That alone makes me happy enough." Margaret smiled as she fell into deep sleep. The pain of the past would never disappear. But hope for the future was definitely growing in her heart. Now that she knew what real family was, she could overcome any difficulty. If the three of them worked together, they could surely build a bright future. Her beloved grandson's courage, her daughter's strength, and her own new discoveries. These were the beginning of a new chapter in Margaret's life.